Hello once again as we give you the most accurate wrap on what's happened with auctions right around Australia. In just a moment with Kevin Brogan. Kevin will tell us that volumes are up 33%. Sydney gets back its mojo and we had a big weekend in Melbourne. Back with all the details and Kevin Brogan in just one moment.
Hi everyone, my name's Nick and I'm the Country Manager here at Beepo. We offer outsourcing services for real estate agencies that are looking to become significantly more productive and efficient. Let me give you a bit of a rundown about how our real estate team actually works. At Beepo, we have many positions to assist our clients in the real estate industry. These include sales assistants, trust account and marketing staff. We also have a couple of our most popular products, the property management assistants and rock end property assistants.
Welcome back to the show and welcome as always Kevin Brogan from CoreLogic. Hello Kevin.
Hi Kevin.
We've got a bit of a bonus today too. We might quickly talk about that before we slip into the results, and that is that we'll be joined after our normal auction update show where Kevin Brogan and I will catch up with Michelle Cizelski. Michelle is from Frank Knight, and we caught up with Michelle at the Australian Property Institute annual conference, which was held on the Gold Coast. Lucky you. You were there for a couple of days, Kevin?
Yes, I was. It was a great conference. We had 860 delegates, not just from around Australia, but we partnered with the World Association of Valuation Organisations. So we had quite a lot of overseas delegates at the conference. Really good conference.
Very good. Okay, well, we'll take you to that interview. We're going to have a look at prestige property around Australia, also what is attracting buyers from overseas, where they're coming from and what they're looking for. So that chat with Michelle straight after our normal auction update. First of all, Kevin, let's bring up the preliminary results from the weekend. Not too shabby, I've got to say.
No, look, I think there's a couple of things of note here. I mean, Sydney saw a slight increase in numbers on last week. Preliminary clearance rate 79.7%, so just a hair's breadth away from 80. Very strong result. And then, of course, the big news in terms of volumes came out of Melbourne. So obviously the week prior to the Melbourne Cup, the Spring Racing Carnival, we always see this as a busy weekend. And in fact, this is the busiest week of auctions in Melbourne since this time last year. And despite the increase in auction numbers, we saw a really resilient performance with the clearance rate, and it actually increased slightly on last week at 77.1%.
Very good. And Adelaide was pretty strong too, wasn't it? It was actually the strongest of all of the smaller groups, smaller capitals.
Yeah, look, it was at 68%. I mean, it's a solid result, and I think the interesting thing here is there was also a significant increase in the number of auctions in Adelaide over last week. So yes, that was quite pleasing. And looking through the results, there were actually quite a few really quite high value sales in there as well. So it's quite an interesting weekend.
Indeed. Well, we'll take you to the top sales in all of those areas: Sydney, Melbourne, Adelaide. We'll take you to the ACT and also to Brisbane. But before we do that, let's bring up the Sydney sub-region results. Tell us what were the highlights here for you, Kevin?
Yeah, look, the Inner West was the leading region at 89.4%. Quite a busy region, 66 auction sales happened there. And we've actually seen quite a resurgence in Blacktown. I mean, the last 2 weeks, it's been at the top of the league table. This week, it was only knocked off by the Inner West, but still at 87.5% off lower volume. Quite a resurgence there over the last month or so. Ryde continuing its really strong performance at 86%, and indeed Ryde is where we're going to see the highest sale in Sydney and the country from Saturday.
Well, that highest sale, only by a smidgen, I've got to say, just beat Melbourne, didn't it? But that's
not a lot in it.
Not a lot in it, but 5.5 million. For the property at 58 Mary Street, Hunters Hill, Bressick Whitney's Nicholas McAvoy and Narelle Scott selling this 5 better. Sandstone home, circa 1885, set well back on a very large block, 1,505 square metres. very private, very secluded, Kevin.
Absolutely, and only 10 kilometres away from the Sydney CBD. Look, I mean, this property, as you pointed out, has got bags of charm and character. It's a very substantial and imposing home. The median price in Hunters Hill is 2.66 million at the moment, and that is down about 6% from the 2017 peak. But as we've often discussed with these highest sales, they are occurring in regions where that downturn, that loss of value, has been relatively small when you compare it to the sort of aggregated double-digit percentage falls that we saw in Sydney overall.
Okay, to Melbourne now. Melbourne sub-region results. Kevin, what do you see there?
Yep. So again, a slightly more even spread across Melbourne, but I think once again the story around the highest clearance rates is the Outer East. So we've seen that resurgence in the Outer East for several months now, leading the pack, and at 85.4%, really quite a busy weekend in the Outer East. The busiest region was the inner region of Melbourne, 76.6%, 284 auctions just in that one region alone. Closely followed by activity in the inner south, 78.7% there.
Top sale coming out of Kew. This one 3 to 5 Remington Avenue, just a smidgen under the top sale out of Sydney. Only pipped them by about 75,000, if that's a small amount anyway. 5,425,000 Jealous Craigs, a three-person combination, Richard, Rebecca and Campbell, selling this 6 better. Promoted as a bit of a resort property, and I can easily see why. It's over 2 lots, saltwater pool, floodlit north-south tennis court. And of course, if you're going to have a resort, you've got to have your own self-contained clubhouse, Kevin.
Absolutely. I mean, that clubhouse over 2 stories is quite something. Look, this house, very solid brick home, quite imposing. Again, 6-bedroom house built in 1965, but very modern in its fit out. The sort of concave clubhouse is really quite a feature. I certainly wouldn't mind living there myself. It looks very good. This property actually last sold in 2010 for 3.8 million, so it gives you an idea of the growth that's occurred in Kew. Very popular, prestigious location, about 10 kilometres to the east of Melbourne. We mentioned how tightly held some of these areas are as well, with the highest sales, and the average length of ownership in Kew is about 15 years. It's interesting to note, though, that this is one of those areas in Melbourne where the median price did actually fall quite sharply from 2017 to about 1.87 million.
Okay, well, our top sale out of Queensland. This one is in Balmoral, 45 Olive Grove, 1,900,000. Here we are in Brisbane. We're almost nudging up to top sales of around 2 million. It wasn't so long ago we were, heralding sales at $1 million, but here we are, 1.9 million. A Ray White New Farm selling this one, jumping across the river into Balmoral, Brandon Wortley, 5-bedroom, a 3-level contemporary home, just a bit of a walk, slow stroll down Oxford Street to all those restaurants and shops. Beautiful area, Balmoral.
Oh, look, it certainly is. I mean, this property is on quite a generous lot. It's as you mentioned. I mean, built in 2016. The style is very contemporary. It's interesting. This property was built in 2016. First offered to the market in 2017 with an asking price of about 2.3 million. Now it hasn't been on the market for the entire time since then, but there have been various periods when the property has been marketed. Obviously, the sale price at 1.9 million, a little way shy of that, but probably not a bad result. Worth noting here in Balmoral, median price is about 1.05 million, and that's actually up about 8% on last year.
Quick break now. We'll come back and give you the top sales in South Australia, in WA, and also the ACT. And don't forget a special chat with Michelle Cizelski from Knight Frank coming up shortly as well. Back in just a minute.
In today's market, great ideas alone simply aren't enough, but innovative execution can hand you a real competitive advantage. Nightlight is a cutting-edge illuminated signboard by Printforce that offers round-the-clock visibility and features that maximise advertising space, improving your exposure. Buyers can now see the full picture, day or night, with Nightlight's edge-to-edge illuminated surface, which utilises environmentally friendly, scratch-resistant technology. Now available in 6x4 and 8x4. Nightlight is as versatile as you need to be in today's market. Let your clients know you're working day and night for them, and then prove it with Nightlight.
Welcome back to the show as Kevin Brogan from CoreLogic runs us through the top sales around the country and also gives us the first look at the most accurate results from all around the country. Let's go to South Australia now, where our top sale there is in Leabrook, 28 Godfrey Terrace, $1.4 million, Toop and Toop's Tim and Megan Threadgold, selling this for better. And a very elegant bungalow, I think built around 1928, stroll from the study out onto a very nice courtyard area, fireplace, timber floors, combining traditional styles with a contemporary extension, which I believe may have been at the rear, but that's more of a modern extension, Kevin.
Yes, look, it is. I think, we have seen this this type of property at the top of the sales in Adelaide. As you say, the period features brick fireplaces, timber floors, very ornate plasterwork, all of those things giving it a tremendous charm. I was going to say it had tremendous street appeal, but in fact the photographs are taken from behind the hedge. You can really just see the hedge from the street, but the front facade is very appealing, and then at the back, very much more modern style. Open living area, and they've actually added a first floor to that extension with a couple of bedrooms, including the master suite. It's only about 5 kilometres from the city of Adelaide. It's about 5 kilometres to the east, and this is an area, Leabrook, again pretty tightly held. And I think here the average ownership is about 13 years, and it's worth noting here that the median price is 1.65 million, which has shown very strong growth. For Adelaide, a median of 1.65 million is very high.
Yes, indeed. Okay, to the ACT now, where we saw the top sale there coming from Ainslie and 115 Hannon Court, $1.4 million. Independent property groups Ray Moon and Paul Carrozza selling this 5 better. The owners have breathed a new life into this home, fairly obviously. It's got its own separate home office and studio, which no doubt was a major attraction and added to the sale price of $1.4 million.
Yeah, look, this is, and again, we see these trends appearing. In Canberra, a lot of the properties that are selling for these high prices, although this one is actually out to the north of Canberra, very well established leafy suburbs. It feels like it's a very sort of tranquil place to live, even though it's so close to the city centre. Quite a generous block, 822 square metres, and those established gardens give you that, that additional feel of tranquility. Solid home, built in 1965, but as you pointed out, it's got a really modern feel to it, the way that it's been refurbished. This property last sold for $162,000 in 1998. So obviously it's been held for quite some time.
Yes.
The median price $975,000 in Ainslie, and that's actually down about 9% since 2018. But this property, as you can tell, is quite special for this location as well.
So too is the top sale out of Western Australia. Spectacular views from this apartment. It is apartment 1 at 158 Marine Parade. That gives you a bit of an indication about where it is in Cottesloe. $2,535,000. Abel McGrath, Simon McGrath, selling this 3 better 2 bathroom. Has 2-car lock-up in a garage and then another 2 outside. Overlooks North Cottesloe Beach, open plan living. And by the way, did I mention views?
Absolutely. Look, this unit, 300 square meters of living area, so really a huge unit. Built in 1987 around those views, panoramic views with a sort of curved viewing window, looking out to the west, so you get all of those sunsets over the ocean. And I noticed that they do feature in the photographs of the property, because that really would be a major selling feature. Look, I mean, this property is about 12 kilometres to the west of Perth, and the only thing that's separating you from the beach, there's a road and then a reserve. The median price in Cottesloe is about $790,000. It's down 7.1% over 2018. But again, I was interested to see in Cottesloe the sort of shape of the curve of median prices. They have withstood the test that the overall Perth market has gone through over the last few years. So generally in Perth, values have been declining since about 2014. But Cottesloe has probably fared a little better. And with properties like this, you can sort of see why it's still a very desirable place to live.
Well, Kevin Brogan joins me again on Friday. We'll have a look at the final wrap, the final numbers, but just take us back to those initial clearance rates. Run through those for us, Kevin, if we could.
Yeah, absolutely. So the strongest clearance rate came out of Sydney, 79.7%, then Melbourne, 77.1%, Adelaide, 68%, Canberra, 55.6%, Perth, 43.5%, and just a quick shout out for the Hunter region, which scored over 80% at the weekend, and that's the lead of the regional markets.
Very good indeed. Well, Kevin Brogan will be back on Friday. Stick around, because Kevin and I will catch up with Michelle Cizelski from Knight Frank. Michelle is in fact the head of research for residential at Knight Frank, I believe, and shared the stage with Kevin at the Australian Property Institute annual conference on the Gold Coast last week. A really interesting insight and chat we have with Michelle as we talk about the prestige market in Australia and how it's viewed by overseas buyers. Kevin Brogan will join me with Michelle in just a moment. Kevin, I'll just at this point say farewell. Look forward to seeing you on Friday, but more importantly, I'll see you in about 30 seconds time with Michelle.
Thanks very much, Kevin.
Stick around for that. Stay with us straight after the break.
Did you know you can save up to 70% on your staff costs by outsourcing the low-value, repeatable tasks so your team can focus on growing your business? Beepo is an outsourcing provider focused on the real estate industry. With an English-speaking, tertiary qualified and fully trained team in the Philippines, Beepo will give your business the boost it needs to start growing and returning value to you. For more information, visit beepo.com.au.
Hello and welcome to this special presentation. I'm going to be taking you in a moment to a special conference that was held to the Australian Property Industry Annual National Conference, I believe on the Gold Coast. Joining me to talk about that, we'll introduce our special guest as well, Kevin Brogan from CoreLogic. G'day, Kevin.
How are you going, Kevin?
Good. Got you in a different location. It was on the Gold Coast, is it?
Yes, absolutely. We're at the convention centre on the Gold Coast.
Okay, and joining us also from Knight Frank is Michelle Cizelski. Michelle is their partner and also head of residential research at Knight Frank. Michelle, welcome to the show. You're not a stranger to us. We've had you on the show in the past.
Yeah, we had a chat. Was it a couple of months ago, I think?
It was. Too long. We'll have to get you back on. Now, the subject of your conversation today, and I believe they had you both on stage, was about prestige property, the prestige property market, Michelle.
Yes. At Knight Frank, we specialise in prestige property. And I guess when we're talking about prestige property at Knight Frank, we consider that to be the top 5% of the market by value. And today we went through some of those factors that are influencing the prestige market at the moment in Australia.
Well, what are those factors that you identified, Michelle?
Yeah, look, I guess the first one that we have really identified is that over the past 18, 24 months, where the mainstream market has suffered, significantly with a lot of the lending, the stricter lending that has been implemented across the banks, the prestige market hasn't I guess, had such an impact and has continued to see growth over the past, the past 12 months. So across Australia, across the major cities, on average, it's about a 1.8% growth across those cities in the prestige market. So again, that top 5% of the market.
So what's happening in Australia with the number of ultra wealthy people? Is that on the increase, Michelle?
Yeah, look, it has. It increased 4% over the past year in Australia, which is actually on par with the global growth. And then 4% is expected over the next 12 months as well with this group. So when you look at the overall population growth at around just under 2% for those cities, when we're looking at 4% growth, there's certainly a lot more wealth being created in our country.
Kevin, I understand that prime property, by Knight Frank's definition, is defined as the top 5% of each market, as Michelle just said. Is it stronger in any one market than anywhere else, Kevin, that you're noticing?
Yeah, look, obviously Michelle's research is focused on a really particular subset in the ultra high wealth individuals. When we've done our breakdown that we've discussed, we've taken the top 25%, the upper quartile. And certainly we've seen in Sydney that is the portion of the market that is performing best at the moment. But perhaps within that 25% band, we did actually see quite a significant impact with the market softening, which as Michelle has said, probably wasn't evident in that really top 5% slice.
Looking at the cap cities, Michelle, which of those have done really well in the prime residential market in terms of capital growth?
Yeah, look, over the last 10 years, by far Sydney has been the standout. Over the past 10 years, if you were to compare the prestige market in Sydney compared to what's been happening in the mainstream market, over that time where Sydney may have grown by 90%, the mainstream market hasn't. Just in the last 12 months, it's just underperformed over that 10-year period. So looking at that difference, the other place we've seen that is in Brisbane as well, where the prestige market over the past 10 years has actually grown more than what the mainstream market has. And I guess when we're talking about the mainstream market, we're talking about everything that's just outside that prestige market that we cover, that prime market. So your everyday types of properties. So Melbourne, Gold Coast, and Perth. The mainstream market is still just a little ahead of the prestige market over that last 10 years.
Oh, I understand too, Michelle, that you've had a look at the top 5 suburbs in those major capital cities. Did you notice much variation there? Anything that stood out for you?
Yeah, look, when we're looking at the top 5 locations, the top 5 suburbs around the 5 major cities. If you're looking at the median value, then obviously by far Sydney is the standout in terms of median value. But when you're looking at that 10-year growth over that time, it really does vary, even with those top 5 suburbs that are ranked by median value. So we could see like 122% growth in some of the cities, and in some of them they're actually recorded negative 10% in some of the poorer performing cities.
Kevin, back to you for a moment. In terms of your work with valuers around Australia, are you noticing a major increase in the value of prestige property, particularly in waterfront areas?
Oh, look, we're definitely seeing with valuations that I review and liaise with valuers on that the purchase prices of those properties where they're under contract are being met. I think in 2018, CoreLogic recorded 104 sales of over $10 million. I'm looking to Knight Frank research for confirmation. And that was actually about a 20% increase over the 2017 figure. And of course, the rest of the market, as we've discussed, was actually declining at that stage. So from a valuation point of view, one of the key drivers for being able to form an opinion of value is the availability of evidence. And certainly there wasn't any shortage of that in 2018.
I'll come back to you in a moment, Michelle. I just want to talk to you about confidence going forward. But before that, just during the conference there, Kevin, have you had a chance to talk to valuers from around the world in terms of how the Australian market stacks up to some of those prestige markets around the world, like, Hong Kong and, Berlin, Paris and places like that?
Oh, look, absolutely. I think in terms of market expertise, I'd defer to Michelle, but I've certainly spoken to valuers from Hong Kong, but also in New York. And while there are some really significant differences between our markets in terms of valuation process, I suppose, and the trends that they're looking at, there are some really strong parallels drawn. And in fact, I mean, in the New York market, I was really interested to see a lot of the discussion about the top end of the market was around land tax and how a punitive land tax was actually impacting on the market. And of course, when I was sort of talking to those valuers, we were going through the throes of a federal election where one of the key policy areas was actually about the incidence of tax on property. So lots of parallels, but lots of market differences.
Michelle, have you, in your research, have you been able to get a bit of a feel for the buyer profile? Globally, what are buyers looking for in Australian prestige property?
Yeah, look, when you look at the global wealthy population, I mean, it's a no-brainer. Where I'm standing on the Gold Coast and I can see the beach out the window, and that's kind of the postcard back to these global buyers. That all of Australia is like this, and we know that it's not necessarily like that. But it's the clean air, it's the stable, somewhat stable political environment. It's the somewhat stable. I guess from an ownership point of view, there's not a lot of the properties around the world are under leasehold. So knowing that they've actually secured a property and that can be passed to the next generation is hugely important for the ultra wealthy population. But when you're actually looking at some of the purchases they're making, some of them are pure trophy assets. That's quite common when we're talking about this group. But a lot of them are making sure they are close to universities because they're buying for their grandchildren. So it really depends. And the actual, I was kind of walking through business class on my plane on the way up here. And I think that's a good comparison to show that you really can't pick who is an ultra wealthy person these days. It's a lot of younger people coming through, entrepreneurs. It's not necessarily that the older gentleman sitting over there with the hat on. You really can't pick it. There's a lot of young designers that are coming through that are now on the world stage, and they're very, very wealthy. And property is that stable asset that they like to invest in.
And tell me about the ultra high, wealth individuals. Are they showing confidence in the property market? Are they planning to purchase over the next 12 months to 2 years?
Yeah, look, when we actually did a survey last year and we asked for 2019, who was planning on making a purchase in Australia, and 16% believed that they were making another property purchase in Australia. And I guess what's really important about this group is that they make a lot of purchases, but they don't necessarily let go of property. So when we're talking about that top end of the market, it can become quite limited in a lot of the cities, and this is probably most prevalent in Sydney, where there really isn't a lot of that prime property that's meeting that expectation of locals, but obviously the global population as well. And
Michelle, staying with you just for a moment, because there's so much interesting research has come out of your presentation, but let's talk about currency, the Australian currency. How attractive is that to overseas purchase, particularly out of Asia? Because I understand you've identified that about 45% of Asians said that Australia was their prime destination.
Yeah, look, we did discover that 45% felt in Asia, of the ultra wealthy population that we surveyed, that Australia would be their top destination of choice for buying. But when we have a look at the currency play, over the past few years, we know that foreign taxes have been introduced, and we know that with the currency at play, it kind of cancelled out a lot of those foreign fees. There are, I guess, external factors that stopped the inflow of foreign investors coming into the country. But if we were to take it as an example, and a really good one, I guess, to make is that if we were to have a look at Australian prime property over the past 12 months, it grew on average about 1.8%. If I was buying with Japanese yen, it would have actually fallen 6% over that past year. So, there is quite a difference if someone's coming to buy a prestige property in Australia if they're buying with another currency.
Kevin, just in terms of your conversations with valuers around the world, the valuation models that we use in Australia, how do they compare with what happens overseas?
Well, look, we've actually got here in the conference Sir David Tweedy, who is the head of the International Valuation Standards Committee. And so in Australia, our professional standards are built around international valuation standards. And we've got delegates here from South Korea and Singapore and Hong Kong and Papua New Guinea. And as I said before, I mean, there are obviously some significant differences relating to market behaviours. But in terms of valuation, the fundamentals are fairly consistent throughout the world. Mm.
I'm looking at a very interesting slide here, Michelle, and this is very unfair because you don't know which one I'm looking at, but it looks to me as if it's the layout of a home with the different cap cities in the different areas. Gold Coast is the terrace, Perth is the kitchen. Well, what's actually? I'm going to pull that out and we'll pull that up now just so that our audience can see it. Tell me what this is. What is this describing?
Yeah, look, you probably needed to see the slide before that. That was the slide that I kind of wrapped up on. But the slide before that was showing that even though in our earlier sessions we were talking about how...
I'm just pulling that slide up for our viewers now.
So in the Sydney and Melbourne markets, if we're just buying an everyday home, a mainstream home, then it is quite unaffordable for those that are first home buyers buying into the market. But when we're looking at the prestige end of the market and we compare that on a global standard, a global comparison, we are relatively affordable if you're buying prestige space. So what we've compared is if we were to take the exercise that if you were given a $1 million US check, how much could $1 million that check buy you around the world? So if you're in Monaco, you could only buy 16 square metres, whereas if you're in Sydney, you could actually buy 51 square metres. So there's actually quite a difference, and you'll see on the chart there the other cities around Australia, how we kind of fit down the pagoda chart. We're not at the top as you would if you were comparing the mainstream markets of Sydney and Melbourne to other global locations.
And the second slide that we referred to, which is the layout of the house, is that sort of talking about the dynamic or the size of each of those areas?
Basically. So if you were to start off in Monaco, you could afford the dressing room of an internal floor plan of a luxury home. If you go around the library, I think was the New York or the London, which are always quite close in comparison. And being on the Gold Coast, you could afford the terrace of a prestige home with that $1 million.
It's a wonderful way to describe it, and I'm so pleased that I've found that and been able to share it, because I think that puts everything into perspective in terms of affordability when you look at it like that.
Oh, it does. It certainly does, and I think it's something that we review every quarter, because obviously talking about US dollars, the currency play does make a difference, but it's always around that very similar mark for Sydney at 51 square metres.
Absolutely incredible. Hey, we are out of time, guys. Thank you so much. Michelle, I appreciate you coming out, because I know you've just stepped off stage, and Kevin, of course, we really appreciate all of the time we get to spend with Kevin Brogan from CoreLogic. But Michelle, thank you especially, and thanks to the folks at Knight Frank as well. I appreciate your time.
Thanks a lot. Thanks
very much, Kevin.
Thank you.